Good morning. How is everyone? Good. All right. So my name is Katie Salen. I am based in New York, and I'm very happy to be here, very thankful to have a chance to speak to you at this conference. And today I'm going to talk about a specific case study of one project that a nonprofit that I run in New York called Institute of Play has developed, which is a public school based in New York City that's been organized around game-based learning. And one of the kind of questions, obviously, that has come up over the past couple days around this conference are, what are some models that might begin to illustrate examples of what reinventing might look like? And so my intent today is to show you an example of the kind of work we're doing on the ground to maybe give you a sense of some ideas that you might be able to take back to your local contexts. So the Institute of Play is a small nonprofit in New York. A third of our staff are game designers. A third of our staff are former teachers, principals, learning designers, and then another third are kind of communications people and strategy people. And the focus of our work is really around this idea of engaging young people. And the need that we identified in starting the nonprofit was the fact that certainly in the United States, there's an enormous number of young people that are simply disengaged from school, don't see it as a place for them to be, a place that's relevant to them. And part of it is because their lives outside of school feel and behave very, very differently than what their lives inside of school look like. Outside of school, in many cases, is very technology rich. They have a chance to participate in online communities where they produce things, they share things, they work collaboratively. And often their experience in school doesn't look like that at all. It may have no technology at all. They're often not oriented in kind of learning by doing situations. They rarely have an opportunity to collaborate. And so we really began to look at how could we bring our expertise from the game development space to bear on the design of what learning and teaching might look like. There are three kind of contemporary conditions that have really influenced our work and that we're really paying close attention to. One is a kind of rising acknowledgement of the value of social and peer-based learning. So this is of an image of a Filipino family in Los Angeles. The littlest one there is playing a Nintendo DS game. There's one device in the whole family. It gets passed around among all of the children. And the learning to play the game and all of the kind of expertise and conversations that happen in this social way. Kids hand-to-hand passing the device, sharing information. And we see this again and again in the way that people are using technology and the ways in which people are engaging in content. So we're very interested in this principle of peer-based learning. The second concept is the kind of changing role of adults. So we see definitely in many online spaces, communities that are intergenerational, the role of adults as a kind of guide, participating with kids both as experts and as learners. So we're really trying to look at how we might rethink the role of teachers, not only as facilitators, which is an idea that's been around for a long time, but really as translators to help kids connect their interests outside of school with academic interests that may be happening in school. We know that lots of middle school kids in particular actually don't know what they're interested in. So how can we begin to have adults help kids orient themselves around those interests? And then the third big idea is just around the ever-evolving technology platforms that are out there. And for us in particular, games as a platform that provide models of what data-rich environments look like. So one of the really interesting things about games, especially digital games, is that they're just full of data that provide players in an ongoing way with information around how they're doing in the game. What they need to work on, where they need to go next, how they need to improve. And as we think about data in education, we can look to games as models for how data can be designed into games in ways that are productive not only for the learner but also for the teacher. So I'm going to talk today about 4 principles that come from game design to give you guys a sense of what we think games and their design might begin to offer. And I'm going to talk about these 4 principles, this idea that everyone can participate. So how do you begin to develop differentiated experiences that allow kids in different ways to participate and share expertise? How do you design experiences where challenge is constant? So one of the beautiful things about games is that they're simply problem spaces that put lots of obstacles in the way of the player. And the play of the game is working to overcome those obstacles. So how do you begin to think about the classroom as an engaging space where lots of challenges are set up for kids to overcome, which are simply spaces for them to develop skills, content, and concept knowledge. Feedback is immediate and ongoing, so I'm going to talk about this idea of games as data-rich environments, and I'm also going to talk about this idea of games as problem spaces that allow kids the opportunity to build expertise. So the school in New York is called Quest to Learn. It opened in fall 2009. It's a regular public school, so any child in the city that lives in the district can go there. It's non-selective, which means there's no testing to get in, and it operates on a public school budget. The idea was to try to design a school from the ground up that was informed by core principles of game design and play. The curriculum uses a lot of existing resources, but those resources are customized through a collaboration with with a group of game designers that are embedded in the school and curriculum developers that work with the teacher every day to figure out how you could design, to turn those resources into really engaging game-like experiences.
Playing games in school is helping me learn better than I ever had before in any other subject in other schools I've been to in my entire life.
Do we have any more green? Where's the key? Wait, so how about the top is right here? I'll start like.
Wait, are we supposed to do it on this side or do we do it on the back?
Only thing you're making in this round is a good continent. Possibly an isthmus if you earn it, islands and peninsulas. So it will be very blank except for your continent name.
To somebody who's never seen Galactic Mappers before, it basically looks like a class-wide map-making / art project where students are working in teams to build different sections of a gigantic map of the world. The better the students do, the more complex their continent can get because they will keep earning. And the more they earn, the more challenging the game becomes. And if they want to have a really fully developed continent, that need to know within them is going to start to seek out this additional information.
North,
South,
east,
west.
do you have a landmass?
We have one, and then we can make this into another.
Well, that would make you have two continents. Is there another way?
Yes, we
you
have
can
another. We have different people around the whole place.
Oh, just cut this out,
Okay.
like, here.
Okay, group number 1 and group number 5. You guys have an isthmus. You need to somehow share that isthmus between the two of you. You guys can communicate amongst yourselves to make that isthmus work.
An embedded assessment is a form of assessing students' knowledge while they're engaged in the learning process. So rather than giving them a test at the end of a unit, we try to find ways of assessing them while the learning is actually happening.
Rubric. Your group will be graded on the following qualities. Map skills.
Demonstrates clear knowledge of category and physical geography while playing the game. Being positive in the group. It's up to 10 points. Yeah, be positive.
Okay, so now what?
So what I do in advance is I create a rubric with certain things I'm going to look for. Part of what I'm assessing them on does include content knowledge. It includes application of that content knowledge. It also looks at systems thinking and design thinking. And I assess them just by either listening to the types of things that they're saying about the different pieces. So if I can hear a student explain to another student, why they want to put certain things in a particular spot, or correcting students on certain map technique or something, those are good clues as to that student's depth of knowledge.
Sunny Bacon is a continent where aliens like Kang and Kodos eat a lot. So that's why it's called Sunny Bacon. It's based on breakfast.
Sunny Bacon has a lot of vegetation and hills and a lot of mesas. Yeah.
Galactic Mappers forces students to use their knowledge of maps to apply it to something that hasn't been created before. So they're designing a map from the ground up, and the maps some of these groups design, they get this done in 20 minutes, in a group of 4 or 5. So it allows them to really make sure that they're properly designing a good map with sensible map components, and also incorporating physical geography as well as cartography skills. So Galactic Mappers tests that.
There is a peninsula on this continent. Can you show me where the peninsula is? Excellent job. And you have one other card. I see you have an isthmus card. Where's your isthmus leading to? Where's the isthmus? Very good, excellent.
In the discussion phase of Galactic Mappers, it really gets them to think about maps in a collaborative space and sort of imagine the possibilities of a spot on Earth. So it becomes more than just making a map, it's also designing a living, breathing planet, and it gets them to start thinking about the components of that planet in a different way, and the possibilities if we were to put people on this planet.
So this is a 6th grade classroom. It's a class that's an integrated English language arts and social studies class. It's a class at the beginning of the year where the students have been really tasked with learning ideas about geography. And so this game, Galactic Mappers, was developed in collaboration with the teacher Ross Flatt there. And he was really looking at ways that he could provide a space in which kids could activate the content knowledge that they've been developing around vocabulary, different ways of making maps. And in this game, they're basically developing a new kind of world space that they then use for the next 10 weeks. So when you look at the design of Galactic Mappers, there are two really interesting things I think that it does, again, drawing from the qualities of games. One is that the game really looks at this notion of giving kids different roles within a team so that they're charged with bringing a different kind of expertise to bear on the problem. So we know that certain types of collaboration that's undifferentiated, there's something that can happen called the free rider problem, which all of us that have been in collaborations know this can happen, which is there's a certain group, members of the group that just don't pull their weight. But if you begin to differentiate the group around different kinds of roles, so in this case, there are certain people that are map makers, a certain person that's a kind of scribe. They have a really particular role that they might play within that group, and we see this modeled all the time within other kinds of games. The second principle is this idea of challenge as constant. So this game, Galactic Mappers, from day to day unfolds new kinds of challenges for the kids to work on. So in this day, we saw that the kids were working to a point where they maybe can earn an isthmus. Right? And it's probably unusual for 6th graders to be excited about earning an isthmus, but in this game, they're incredibly driven to do so. So you heard Ross use this term called the need to know, and it's the basis of all of our work, which is we start with the state standards, the Common Core, 21st century skills, but the question we ask the teacher is, what is the need to know that you're creating in the student that they're going to be so excited to jump into this problem space, to learn map making skills and what an isthmus is to do that. So in this case, the notion of the creation of a world space was the context for a need to know that Ross created for the students. I want to give some examples of other kinds of games that we've developed for use in the classroom, just to give you a sense that they're from the version of paper-based, which you just saw with Galactic Mappers, all the way to some commercial-grade games, which I'll talk about a little bit later. This next game I'm going to talk about is an iPad-based game or tablet-based game called Refall. This is for a 9th grade English language arts class. And it's a game that helps kids sort and identify prefixes, roots, and suffixes of words. So it's a game kind of like Tetris, where roots, suffixes, and prefixes are falling as blocks from the top of the screen. Kids need to sort those into the appropriate categories. You'll notice maybe that there's a pause button. At any point, the child can press the pause button and get a hint about the root meaning of any of the root suffixes or prefixes on the screen. This was a game built in Flash in less than 2 weeks. It has an XML or a level editor, which looks kind of like an Excel spreadsheet at the back end that a teacher can modify the words sort of on the fly for students. So it's a strongly differentiated kind of game that teachers can look at where students are at and modify it either that day in class or prior to the next class. The next game I want to talk about uses PowerPoint as the basic technology. So this is a game designed for a 7th grade English language arts class called Story Weavers. And in the state standards really look at a lot of standards around knowing how to write, understanding the writing process, developing fiction. So this is a collaborative story writing game in PowerPoint that kids play and are able to develop all kinds of stories together. And as you see on the screen here, sort of slide by slide, the game is scaffolded to allow them to generate new kinds of content, which they then share with their group and produce kinds of stories. What's fantastic about this game is that we've been able to use it from 6th grade all the way up to 10th grade. So the same kind of game structure can be used within a range of classes. The next two principles I'm going to talk about is this idea of feedback is immediate and ongoing, and the idea of solving problems builds expertise. So as I mentioned, one of the real promises that we see particularly in digital games is the fact that they're incredibly data-rich environments. A lot of educational resources traditionally have been data poor. They don't produce a lot of data around student learning. So one thing that games do, partially because players demand it, is that they're constantly giving information, again, to the player and to the teacher, well, to the player, around how they're doing. So we've been looking at ways in which we can begin to think about the classroom as a data-rich environment, the ways in which games can be modified, not only to provide data for the learner, but also for the teacher. So when we think about games, we talk about a tight coupling between learning and assessment. So one thing that is, I think, happened in the United States, partially because of the dominant conversation around standards and sort of test taking, is that learning and assessment have really been pulled apart. So the dominant conversation is around summative assessment, which are these big tests that kids take at the end of the year. What we try to look at is how can we shift that conversation back to formative assessment, which is assessment while students are learning, assessment in the moment of learning. And it's something that games do very, very well. And data becomes a kind of an interface that provides feedback for the student around how they're doing. The second thing, which is what I mentioned earlier, is that games are really just big problem-solving spaces that players get dropped into, and they're compelled to learn a bunch of skills in order to be successful at that game. So we've been doing a lot of thinking about how you might reimagine a curriculum as a set of complex problem spaces that students are dropped into on day one, super interested in solving the problem, but have no ability to do so because the problems are so complex. And so the skill development, content development, concept development happens over time as that larger problem space is broken down into smaller challenges. And so we're really trying to think about how the notion of problem solving actually is an opportunity for kids to build expertise. The last game that I want to talk about is a game that will launch in 2 weeks. We have a collaboration with a big video game publisher called Electronic Arts out in California, as well as an assessment group in the United States called ETS, Educational Testing Service. And the goal of that work is to begin to look at the way in which existing commercial games, commercial quality video games, might be taken up and modified in ways that they operate as game-based assessments in the classroom, again with a focus on formative assessment. So the thinking is, what if we started already with commercial grade quality, commercial grade technology that has a big user base, and begin to look at, are there ways to modify that code, that game, in a way that we can bring assessment and learning into it in ways that when a teacher brings this game into the classroom or a parent brings it into the home, that there's a sense of trust that the learning that is promised to happen in that game is actually happening. So the first product that we've been working on, again, is this collaboration with Electronic Arts and ETS. It's a modification of the new SimCity game, which came out last March. So SimCity is a series of games that Electronic Arts has produced for over 10 years, and they're city building simulations. So the idea is you have an ability to build a city from scratch. You can push that city in all kinds of directions. You can make it a very industrial city. You can make it a more rural kind of city. But you're constantly balancing the challenges between industry, between the happiness of people, between the kind of politics, energy consumption. And so we thought, well, here's a fantastic game that is a simulation of a complex system. Could we begin to look at ways of modifying that game so that it, A, helps kids build skills around argumentation and reading comprehension, which again is one of the big standards in the States, as well as some 21st century skills around systems thinking. So we are really strong advocates of the ability of kids to learn to think systemically, because we have this belief that the kind of current problems facing us today require complex systems thinking. They're not problems that can be solved simply. They're problems that actually you have to understand how to look at relationships between parts, understanding ways in which different parts of systems operate, interact with other parts. So we took this game, we modified it again to look at both teaching ideas of argumentation and systems thinking, but also assessing whether or not kids were making progress against those particular standards. So the image that you're looking at here is an image from the game. One of the key features of the game is it gives a player a chance to look at a number of different maps or views of the city. So the view you're looking at here is of it's a kind of chart of the pollution levels being produced by different factories in the city. So when the kids enter this game, they're given a partially built city that has a problem with pollution. Their challenge is to figure out how to bring that city back into balance. So one of the first things that most kids that we've seen and worked with have done is they just get rid of the factories, right? Which seems like the most logical solution. So they get rid of all the factories, pollution goes down, and they think they've solved the problem. But what they then understand is that nobody in the city has a job, because this was an industrial city and they took away the means of employment. So then they have to think about, well, if we get rid of the factories and we don't have people employed, what new kinds of businesses might we put in? How do we balance some factories with other kinds of maybe green energy jobs, those kinds of things. So it's quite an interesting and complex problem. One of the things that we've added to the game is a teacher dashboard. So one of the big challenges with games being so data rich is trying to figure out, well, how do you get the data out in ways that are meaningful for the player, which is what game designers spend a lot of time thinking about, but in this case, meaningful for a teacher. So if you have millions of pieces of data being collected every minute, which pieces of those data, in what combination, are going to be meaningful for a teacher? So part of our work with our assessment group is really trying to understand, how do you begin to map patterns of data that represent certain kinds of knowledge in the game, and then how do you create visual representations of that for a teacher? So what you see here is one piece of the dashboard which helps the teacher understand the progress of students through the game. So students move at different speeds. The game can be differentiated for different levels of students. There's also this is not a teacher view, but this is a back-end view of the kind of learning analytics that we've built into the game, again, working with our assessment team that's building assessment models around the data, asking lots of questions, again, well, which pieces of data make sense in terms of helping both a learner and a teacher understand how they're doing in that game. You don't have to understand the details of this other than to know that there's a learning management system also built into the game that's both student-facing and teacher-facing, and it pairs the data that game designers care about with the data that our assessment people care about. And again, turn those into data visualizations that then become meaningful in the context of the classroom. So again, if we look at these 4 principles, SimCity is a game that is intended to touch on all 4 of these principles. So when I talk about the school, the first question people ask is, well, how do you know it's working? What is the data that you have on how the school's doing? And I can talk a little bit about it. So the school has been open for 5 years, which in the life of a school is a very short life. So we don't have that much data. We have only 5 years of data. But we do notice a couple of trends. So one is that we've seen that there's an enormous sense of engagement and a sense of belonging by the students in the school. So kids are eager to come to school every day, and they feel like school is a place for them to be. So for us, that's a big win, right? Because one of the problems we are trying to solve is how to get kids re-engaged in school. A second indicator is that we have really low teacher turnover at the school. So despite the fact that it's an incredibly difficult job because they're doing a lot of custom curriculum design, teachers feel very happy at the school. And the reason they say is that they have a chance to collaborate, that they no longer feel and think about their classroom as a single isolated room within the school, but they really see themselves as a community, sharing expertise, sharing knowledge, in the service of really helping students learn. The standardized test scores to the students, because it's a regular public school, they take the standardized tests. Those Indicators have been slightly above average for the city, but our students are also showing gains in some of the 21st century skills like complex problem solving, collaboration, empathy, systems thinking. And so those are all indicators that the model at least is doing something we think that's pretty interesting that potentially could be taken up and used by others. So for us, this idea of designing for collaboration, sharing, and the building of expertise is really a vision of what learning in the 21st century can look like. It can use technology, it doesn't have to. As I've noted, games can take many, many kinds of forms, but there are principles from the design of games and the design of technology that I think we really want to pay attention to as we begin to look at what our future classrooms can and should look like.